Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications. Here's the silent killer in your marketing strategy: vague objectives. Today's guest, Diana Klochkova, a veteran strategist for Twitter, Star Talk, and high-growth startups, reveals why most goals backfire. She shares the exact formula she uses to pressure test and build winning objectives that actually drive results. If your campaigns aren't landing, this is where you need to look.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to the show, Diana.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. It's really exciting to be here.
It is. So I got to let our listeners know, we've been on pre-show now for almost 15 minutes. We could talk forever, but we've got such an awesome topic to get to today. Before we dive in, though, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. So I'm Diana Klochkova. I'm currently Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Privateer, which is a Series A startup. We work in geospatial AI analytics. One of our co-founders there is Steve Wozniak, who of course co-founded Apple. So I feel very privileged to be a part of that team, and we're doing some amazing stuff in that space. I'm also the founder of Zaya. Zaya is my little baby, my boutique marketing agency that I started about 8 years ago, where I have just had the privilege of working with some amazing teams, largely smaller businesses and startups, growth startups that we really like to focus on companies that are at least somewhat mission driven, specifically in the spaces of environment, education, and equality. So that's been an extremely rewarding thing that I've been working on. My background before that, really like every nook and cranny of marketing, I feel like over the years across sports, big brands, agency, old companies, new companies, big companies, small companies, a little bit of everything. Particularly the growth stage of my career was as social media was very much on the rise as a marketing channel and digital overall. So I feel lucky to have kind of come of age as a marketer in that phase. And it's all led us to where we are now. So now I'm at this place where I get to combine all of that experience and put it into play.
Such an incredible journey, and so many different types of companies, so many different growth stages. What do you feel your niche is? What is it that you love so much about each and every one of them, or what really stands out to you?
I think I like the puzzle, and it doesn't necessarily matter where that puzzle lives. It can be a fintech platform for mortgages, or it can be the world's top soccer team. I like boiling things down to that puzzle that has the same foundations in each case.
Yeah.
I have always been one of, like, even as a kid in school, my SAT math and verbal scores were like right in the same place, which was kind of unusual. Usually, you have people who are like word people or math people. And so I really love the art and science coming together in marketing. That's always been my favorite thing.
I love that. And I think it's interesting because marketers are most marketers have several different companies that they work with. In our case, and with your boutique firm, we've got a lot of different clients. And learning their business and understanding the physics behind a solid state battery in our situation, or why a solar sail will work very well in space, or why iron manufacturing and the metallurgy behind it is so important. We have to adapt. We have to be very smart and learn to adapt to lots of different products, lots of different features, and ultimately develop those positioning and strategies that really help differentiate. But we've got to have the basics down to begin with. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the coolest things that marketers get in their career, right? They can learn about so much and they have to be pretty darn good about what it is that they're marketing. Like, how fun is that?
Absolutely. And I think that having those industry experts and subject matter experts is vital. But always having some kind of outside perspective when it comes to the marketing team can actually make you even better. And we have to be not afraid to ask the dumb questions, right? And something that's new for us. Because sometimes that's been a holdup for the company, is assuming their audience actually understands what they're talking about. So bringing that new perspective can, one, just kind of open up some blind spots, but two, you can bring expertise from an entirely different industry that has maybe figured something out that this one hasn't, and it's
Right.
completely applicable there. That was always one of my favorite things. In particular, I did a lot of work with sports teams, and you get a lot of people who are just diehard fans of that sport and sometimes of that team
Too
who have
close.
blinders on.
Yep.
And their perspective is so valuable for that core fan base. But bringing in that outside perspective, like, hey, this is how big brands do it, this is how startups do it, that can really open their eyes to new possibilities for how they can implement some of the same things.
I agree. And a lot of situation, that's where the strategy falls flat, right?
Mm.
There's so many people working so closely with something that they really aren't looking at it from an outsider's perspective. From the customer's perspective, it's all about me, us, this.
They're in too deep.
Exactly. And really, I think that's why a lot of marketing objectives do not work, is because people aren't looking
Mm.
at it from the right perspective. So you've said that many objectives are either not defined at all or not, or they're absolutely set up to fail out of the chute. What patterns have you noticed in that situation?
Yeah, I think there are a few categories that I tend to put it into. So, like you said, not defined at all or very vague, like, vibe objectives. We'll
Right.
know it when we see it, maybe. Those tend to be extremely, and actually, this is a pattern across all of these categories, being disconnected from what really matters for the overall business. So they might be too broad, they might be too narrow and focused in just on CAC or whatever metric you might have right in front of you without any context for what else is going on around it. Sometimes the objectives are straight up conflicting without anybody realizing it. And so you're actually working against perhaps another team that is doing, again, this is where the math and science comes in. Like, it is the mathematical opposite of what you are trying to do. You're trying to grow reach, they're trying to grow conversion. And those things are actually fighting each other in the same channels. Or it's just straight up unrealistic. I think one of the main things, and we'll get into this more, but having strategies and objectives that are informed by testing and learning and thoughtful approaches to that is really critical. And I think I've often seen folks who just dive right in and here's what marketing is going to do, without any kind of anything to base that off of. And so rather than that one shot, here's the objective, I think it needs to be a process to get there. And then it needs to continuously evolve from there.
Can you share a time when you were in a position where you really had to push back on the objectives that had been defined?
Yes, so many. Where do I start? I have some really good, very like I like the small ones that are just very digestible and tangible, these little microcosms of it. So I was working with an NBA team, and specifically in the paid media space and in paid social, and particularly on Meta, where I had a lot of expertise. I spent time at Omnicom and at Levi's working specifically on a lot of those types of campaigns. We were looking at their efforts there to sell tickets, season tickets, individual game tickets. They were needing to make sure that they sold out. Um, and their objective was just ROI, right? what are you getting out of running these ads? And they even had like a publicized Facebook case study in partnership with Facebook of like how successful they were with their 17x ROI. And I'm sitting here reviewing what they're doing, and they just have insanely high frequency. They're marketing to their existing core fans. Their attribution is completely out of whack to where they're just taking credit in paid media for the purchases of fans that would have bought those tickets anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
Anyway. And it's like I appreciate a focus on ROI. I truly do. And when you have the other things, the context around that set up correctly, that's a great, flagship metric to look at. However, you are not telling the full story and you're just patting yourselves on the back for achieving absolutely nothing and you're throwing money into a black hole and Facebook loves it.
Yeah. Well, they love it. So how would you have, or how did you twist that around once you figured out that the objective was set up on an audience that we already knew that we had, and they weren't capitalizing on new ads?
Controlling frequency,
Yeah.
excluding audiences, who is already in their CRM, who is the sales team already hitting for season tickets effectively. Get rid of that. Your numbers are going to go down. It's not going to look as impressive for you, person running the paid media, but it's actually going to contribute to the business. And you need to be able to articulate how you are doing that and why, although this number doesn't look as pretty as the other one did, it's actually more effective.
Right. And how I'm thinking about you delivering that message to a team, and you
They
were
don't like it.
yeah, and that's where
They
this
don't
all
like
went
it.
to uncover it.
Mhm.
How did you deliver the message? How did they take it? And how did you move forward?
I'm Russian. I'm very straightforward. Um, and again, I really love math. And
Yeah.
I think that it's when you come in with like, look, our job, yes, is to deliver on marketing objectives, but it's also to recognize when we need to tweak those for them to actually deliver on the business.
Right.
And I think that that's where people really put the blinders on and they just want to focus on their thing and again, pat themselves on the back and celebrate. But there's nothing wrong with identifying, hey, here's what we've learned from how long we've been running it like this.
Mhm.
Here's how we're going to take that to the next level.
Right.
Because I say that that money went into a black hole, but that's not entirely true. Even if you're doubling up on reaching people who were already going to buy those tickets, you're still your campaigns are learning. You're gaining a lot of like baseline data and information. You're learning who to exclude and who to include, and so that's not all lost. And it's again like this continuous evolution of we're going to make this better and better. And it's okay to realize that you have veered off the track.
Yeah.
Um,
So how do there's a hidden cost here, right? Of
mm-hmm.
vague metrics. How do you help the teams and competing goals, quite frankly, how do you help the teams realize that? And what are some examples of that?
Yeah, so I think like we just sort of talked about, and there are other examples that we can go through too, but it's when you look at it holistically that those costs come into play. So when you narrow your focus to just a specific campaign or just to marketing, it looks like a win.
Yeah.
But when you start to expand your field of view and understand the role that that's playing within the overall mechanics of the business and the overall expenses in the business, you start to realize, oh, we're duplicating efforts. We're conflicting with this other team. What we're delivering in terms of leads is actually not at all useful to the sales team. And so some of those things start to get uncovered when everybody, and this is where leadership and team culture and the softer things within a company start to matter. The ability to communicate across the company and trust each other to do the right thing, not that just makes you shine and your department shine, but that actually works across the whole business holistically.
And I think equipping, the younger team members in marketing right now to have those hard discussions or
Hmm.
is something that's equally as important here, or being able to recognize them. You and I would see it.
Hmm.
But equipping team members, I think, is something that a lot of people don't think of.
That was again in that sports world where I mean, we worked with 20 of the 32 NBA teams. We worked across major sports organizations, and I would kind of see it over and over again because we were these like digital transformation consultants. And so we got to come in and we'd interview all the different people on the team from most junior to most senior and understand just kind of how they're functioning, where those gaps might be, where the overlap and conflict might be in terms of the work that they're doing. And it was often those more junior folks who were just terrified to admit that they might not be doing everything right. And I feel like I got really lucky early on in my career when I was at Levi's. My boss there, shout out to Gareth Hornberger, one of the best bosses ever. But I remember sitting in a meeting where he was kind of giving an update on the state of the team and what we were working on. And he just came out and was like, you know what? We really haven't been good at this, this, and this. And here's our plan for how we're going to get better at that in the next quarter. And I just had this complete like light bulb of like, how powerful for him to just be the first one to say that before anyone else is like, you guys are screwing this up. He's just owning it and owning the plan to continually get better because nobody's doing everything perfectly. And I think that that's something that is a really important kind of career training thing that, yeah, younger people often don't get. They're run by fear of being exposed that they're not doing everything perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, that's test and scale mentality, right? I mean, every marketing team needs to have that thought process. So let's dive deeper into what really makes a good marketing objective a good marketing objective. You mentioned that you're not a fan of the SMART model, which of course is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. What's missing from that?
I don't necessarily hate those things. Those are good qualities for a goal to have broadly.
Yeah.
But I think I just keep coming back to that word holistic of, you might have one central objective for a marketing team, but it always needs to be placed into context.
Right.
So, because people will just completely hone in on that, put on the blinders, and not kind of put that scaffolding of common sense and what else is happening around it. And it's very easy to go astray in that sense. So I think making sure that, and the SMART framework, I think tries to encompass this, but if it's not obvious yet, this focus of what is the actual impact to the business downstream.
Yeah.
So again, that patting on the back, we hit our numbers, yay, can feel really good. But when you then realize that marketing as this like tip of the spear for the rest of the business is actually pointing that spear in the wrong direction, even though it's really sharp and effective there, that is, again, this huge hidden cost. And so I think that direct impact and the downstream effects, as well as having that lens of have we put this into context in the right way. Those are some really critical components that SMART doesn't always tackle. It just feels like checking boxes and saying, yep, I did the SMART thing.
So do you have a very specific or personal checklist that you use, knowing that context is really the piece of it that's lost when setting an objective?
Yeah. So, and it encompasses some of those SMART components, right? So, I think establishing that direct impact on the business and how is that measurable, right? The M, I'm a fan of the M.
Yeah.
What is the counterbalance? So that's something that isn't thought of, but I think that really helps with this holistic perspective. So you might have a very performance-oriented goal. You're in growth stage startup, you need to be driving revenue. But what is the like almost parentheses counterbalance to that objective that keeps you from veering too far in one direction? So it might be drive leads with whatever qualifiers, et cetera, but maintain a brand that is lighthearted and stands out from this, the others in the field.
Yeah.
not the most detailed example, but what is that counterbalance? So I would add that C as like one of the pieces of the checklist, as well as some of the smart stuff, and flexible.
Yeah.
So there, in the good old days of three martini lunches or whatever, where you set up an ad campaign and it just runs for the rest of the year, you could set an objective and then just see if you hit it. But it's completely unrealistic to think that you can set something, even if it is time bound and if it's a relatively short amount of time, leaving no room for flexibility, is foolish. And so, from a budget standpoint, from an objective standpoint, everyone needs to understand that this is the rule, the objective we're setting is the rule, but we will always consider exceptions as it makes sense. So either because what we're doing has shifted, the landscape has shifted, again, coming up in this career and social when the platforms would just completely change something and now you have to adapt and it doesn't matter what your plan was. That is absolutely critical. So I think I'd add a C and an F, and it doesn't necessarily have to hit all of the smart cuff things, but those are all the lenses that I think we need to be looking at.
I think it's great. And what comes to mind as you're talking through this is, brand building
Mm-hmm.
versus lead gen, right? And
Mm-hmm.
really that lower funnel. And if you go to market and you're launching for the first time, it's going to take 2 to 3 to 4 years to really build that brand out. And the flexibility needed of how you approach your objectives during that time. It could be week by week, it could be month by month, it could be half yearly. You don't know going into it. You just
Mm-mm.
know that the awareness is what is needed to ultimately create that lower funnel action. And so I love what you're talking about from a flexibility standpoint, because I don't believe enough CEOs understand the time constraints associated with all of this. And then ultimately, how that flexibility is one of the only ways that you can, going back to that idea of test and scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially looking at more of like startup and smaller businesses where the situation tends to shift depending on what stage you're in. And brand is much more important at the outset, where maybe you're still in stealth on the product or the product hasn't matured yet. You're dealing with a small customer base, whatever it might be. You're really setting that brand vision and building on that, and establishing yourself in the market. But as soon as you're like ready to turn on those faucets of demand gen, it's very easy to completely lose sight of what you've built
Right.
there and just pivot completely into the other direction. So keeping that pendulum just swinging a little bit, but and flexible enough to modulate where you need it, but still swinging and staying somewhere near the middle is the challenge. And you have to constantly course correct to make that happen.
Do you have a rule of thumb for the number of objectives that you should have with an initiative? And is there ever too many?
I tend to keep it to primary, secondary, tertiary.
Good. Yeah.
Um, again, that's the rule. There are exceptions from that rule, but starting with primary, secondary, tertiary. So I try to make it kind of like, again, growing levels of context.
Yeah.
Primary is like, if we're only allowed to look at one thing, it has to be this, and this is the most highly correlated to our true business goals.
Yeah.
But the secondary and tertiary just kind of back out a bit and give us the context for why the primary
Is
is
what
what it
it is.
is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
that makes good sense. So, how do you decide what the one metric is that really matters?
Nerding out.
Yeah.
Nerding out really hard. So yeah, I mean, I think that in general, it kind of grinds my gears that we've lost sight of the meaning of key performance indicator, and just it's all the things that we can measure, we will. That's not what a KPI is. So I have spent days just digging around in historical data. I feel like every team needs that data nerd that can just like do the beautiful mind thing of just staring at it until things start to light up. But understanding and slicing and dicing and figuring out where those pockets are of, oh, it's really when we are doing this that things are in line with the true business objectives.
Right.
So sometimes it might be a very obvious thing, but sometimes it might be something that we just haven't gotten to yet.
Mhm.
And especially when you're in this world of like new and developing platforms. My favorite example of this was when I was managing social media for Levi's,
Mhm.
and we're in the early days of social for brands. And
Right.
we were one of the leaders. We had like 20 million fans on Facebook, which was insane at the time.
I was one of them.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Um, but I remember sitting down with our analytics guy and having the discussion that seems so stupid now, but the metrics that were being shown to us were like likes and comments and shares.
Mhm.
And so that's what everybody in that space was reporting on to leadership. But we
Right.
sat down, we're like, that doesn't really always tell the story, right? Because it depends on reach, and engagement goes down as you reach more people. And like, because we have such a big page, like, our metrics just are going to be a little bit skewed by that. And everything just looks like huge numbers. And so we sat down and just like, oh, it like engagement is what's really important to us. We have the massive reach, so we need to focus on increasing engagement. But it's not just about the absolute number of engagement. Like, aha, what about we come up with a new metric called engagement rate?
Hmm.
Did not exist in any of the like analytics platforms for the social channels at the time.
I love.
And in retrospect, again, it's just like, yeah, obviously you look at engagement rate, but it
Yeah.
wasn't obvious at the time. And we were like, this is going to be our lead metric. This is what we care about at this phase of what we're doing in social.
I think one of the most difficult things to really equate and measure, especially when you're brand building, is impressions
Mm-hmm.
to awareness
Mm-hmm.
to like even a brand health component in there. And then ultimately, from an engagement standpoint, how does that ladder up in a brand build time period with, a 6-month sales cycle? What are the key indicators that could lead to, a purchase downstream? That
Yeah.
it is so hard.
It's so hard and also fun in some
Ah,
ways, right? Because that's again where the art and science comes in of we should be measuring and tracking and doing all of the math and figuring out what leads to this, but also like talking to your sales team, talking to your field marketing team, getting the anecdotal stuff that again puts that context around like here's what I keep hearing out in the field. That can be your leading metric before the numbers start to show any of that. So it has to be both. And I think that's where I see marketing teams fall down the most is when they're too specialized in one or the other. They're just super creative focused marketing teams, or they're super performance focused. Or they're just split, right? There's a performance marketing and a brand marketing, and they aren't aligned.
yeah.
Those two things working together is really where the magic happens and where I get excited.
And you also have this so what sort of test that you deploy with everything. Talk to us about that.
Yes. Yes. Again, I talked about what is the direct impact and the downstream effects and the not patting yourself on the back as soon as it's out of your court. Um, so the example of the team just selling to their existing customers, right, and patting themselves on the back, writing case studies. There was another example where I was part of an agency working with Twitter, and we were working with their SMB group selling Twitter ads. And we had, built up our campaigns. We had really learned what was working, not working. Our metrics were looking great as far as generating leads. And then we come into Twitter offices to sit down with the cross-functional people who we hadn't had any communication with. We were like pretty siloed with the person who was our main customer. And we're like, great, like what happens after these leads are generated? And they're like, oh yeah, like we really haven't been able to use them. It's like, oh, well, shit.
Not feel good.
Um, and again, it's like, okay, it's not necessarily all a waste, right? What pieces are we missing? Why are you not using them? Is this a lead quality issue, an operational issue? How can we be better aligning the timing of generating these leads when you have the capacity for them? There's just there's a there's a kink in the armor here, and we need to just untangle it. um, but the so what of like you're hitting these metrics, but then what's happening?
Well, it's always such, I mean, that's like the big fight between sales and marketing is quality, right? And,
Yes.
and sometimes it takes bringing in bad quality to get to good quality, just so that you can fine tune the audience metrics.
Hmm.
Behaviors are easy to chase if you've got the right behavior and you've got the right science behind what that behavior is. But a lot of people don't have, $100,000 to spend on segmentation to really determine what that is. And there's some guesswork along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And there's again just the reality of like the the people doing their jobs and operationally how's this working, right? Your sales team might be overloaded. They can't even, you might be bringing in the highest quality of leads, but like they're having product issues, they're having whatever operationally. And so this is again where you need to be flexible as a marketing team and not just like deliver on your targets at all costs, because it's going to be a waste. And actually, you could be doing more harm than good if you're bringing in potential customers and then the rest of your team is bottlenecked and can't deliver, right? So now, okay, let's change gears. Let's move more into brand. So there has to be that flexibility and that constant questioning, like, what is this actually leading to? So what? You hit the numbers. So what?
Yeah, I love it. You've got this great example of you were involved in a Super Bowl campaign,
Mhm.
and you chose one objective and decided to go all in on it. Talk to us about that.
This was the biggest breath of fresh air that I think I had in my time at Omnicom, where we were as part of Resolution Media, which was the performance agency that had pretty recently been wrapped into the holding company. And we were starting to work with OMD and PhD as part of their kind of portfolio and plugging into their media planning. And that inevitably led to a lot of overcomplication, um, especially at a time where, and I'm not as plugged into like media planning these days, but social was the obvious answer to a lot of things because it was so much cheaper and so effective versus the other channels. And we were just not willing to accept that as a company in a lot of ways. So when Loctite, so Henkel, which is the parent company of a variety of different like CPG products, Loctite glue had put together this really wacky, goofy Super Bowl ad. And like Loctite glue does not normally advertise around the Super Bowl. So what they had left for digital amplification of their Super Bowl ad was pretty minuscule compared to the typical Super Bowl guys. So we're like, great, this is like a fun opportunity to try to zig while everybody's zagging. And I sat down with their OMD team and the customer and I was like, realistically, you can only do one thing. You can't try to do all the things with this budget. What's your one goal? And they were actually able to succinctly answer that of like, just maximum reach. Blast it out to, we want as many views as possible for this video. That's it.
Right.
Great, we can totally do that. Let me show you the math of how much each view will cost you across Meta and Twitter, and then compare that to what happens if you try to run, whatever the usual suspects are for Super Bowl amplification.
Right.
Like, there's an obvious answer here. The question is, are you willing to accept that and go all in?
Right.
And they were. And I
Oh
was
my
just
gosh.
like,
Don't
that
you
was the
love
first time
that?
that had ever happened. Just all the budget into
Fun
social,
that as
maximize
well.
views.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. And it was great. It was hugely successful for the budget that they had. Um, it performed extremely well. And it got a lot of buzz. Um, similarly too, so I was actually part of two Super Bowl campaigns that year. The other one was with Nissan, and they had a much bigger budget. There was a lot of car competition, auto competition, and they had bought like a 2-minute spot. It was crazy. They'd put a lot into the Super Bowl that year. And so they were in this mode of like, we have a lot of sunk costs. We need to make sure we keep juicing it. And they were actually like in our war room with us. The Facebook ad platform had crashed, so we could only run on Twitter. So again, flexibility, shifted all that budget to Twitter that day. And we just kept showing them that as we refreshed on Twitter, and we're searching for Nissan, Kia kept showing up. And so I was like, I'm
Wow.
over budget. Do I have approval to keep going up, up, up? And their objective was to shut out the other competition. And they put their money where their mouth was, and they just kept giving me more money. And I spent like $2 million on Twitter within a couple hours.
And I mean, talk about a war room. And I've got this visual of both war rooms right now, like Kia and Nissan, right? And you're just like, okay, finally got to the top. But that's
Exactly.
incredible. I mean, that
Yeah,
kind of flexibility, back to what you mentioned earlier. I mean, of course, this is implementation, but knowing that that flexibility is going to be there for you is a very, very good thing to have.
absolutely.
Oh,
And again, the focus on one objective, knowing that like for Loctite, it was cost efficiency and viewership.
mhm.
Again, that context, right, of like we want as many viewers as possible, and the key context around that is cost efficiency because we're dealing with a small budget. And on the Nissan side, it was like we want to dominate,
Yeah,
and we will do everything it takes
that happened.
to appear that we're dominating.
Yeah. And I think that iteration between like the two examples is really interesting, right?
Hmm.
So, these are, you've given us some examples of what really forces you to evolve an objective. This is
Hmm.
one. What forced that was competitive conquesting, really, if you think about it. I mean,
Hmm.
the competition was going at you, the objective remained the same, but you were just going to spit, more money at it and make it happen.
Yep.
So, what about when additional outside forces for a small startup or maybe a smaller enterprise company who doesn't have a gazillion dollars to spend? What advice do you have for them on how they can evolve that objective?
When an outside force just comes in
Ah,
and crashes what you were doing previously. I think it goes back to that lesson learned from my old boss of be willing to admit that this ain't working. So
yeah,
what are we going to do? And being communicative about that, I think is absolutely critical. So and knowing your stuff, right? So being able to articulate to leadership who are not experts in the channels that you're working with and kind of the intricacies of how they work, but being able to boil down like, listen, here's how the landscape is shifting, here's what we see and how we're being impacted by it. Here's our recommendation for how to move forward.
and how do you
And
have those conversations when a board or an exec team is pushing that unrealistic, you know, thought process or that unrealistic goal that they've got for growth even?
so I've mentioned my love of art and science. I'm an econ nerd, right? So I think that this is also like career advice when you're being asked to do all these things. What is the opportunity cost?
Right.
Right? And so again, it's kind of like that war room situation with Nissan where I think it was like their VP of marketing was sitting there. He had the authority to allow going over budget. And I was like, here's the situation. It's going to cost you.
Mhm.
Is it worth it to you? And so be not just saying no, we can't do that, but saying, okay, if you want me to be able to do this, here's what I need. Here's the data to back that up based on historical experience, whatever, our previous testing. Here's what we would need. Are you okay with that? And that might include budget. It might include we need to cut these other things that we're working on because we don't have the resources or bandwidth and it needs to be all hands on deck. So is that what you want? And then that's their decision to make.
How systematic do you get with a process for assessment of this sort of thing? Is it, do you have a written guidebook or just a key point that you're going to include in a one-to-one every other week with the decision makers in these situations? How do you go at that?
This is where I feel like as marketers, we hopefully have a bit of an advantage of like, we know that you have to know your audience. So the answer to that heavily depends on who you're talking to.
Right.
And you have to understand that. And that's again, kind of when I've seen people transition from early career to really successful leaders, it's that ability to manage up and communicate up in the right ways by understanding what's going to have an impact with those individuals and people in those kinds of roles in general. That's absolutely critical. They don't really want to know everything that you know, but you have to have it to back it up.
And how do you have that conversation with someone who's totally resisting you? I mean, not everyone is a Nissan or a Loctite. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, you do have to choose your battles. This is another great piece of advice that I got from Gareth at Levi's. There was a time that we were kind of getting up in arms of like, these guys just don't get it. We need to be doing this. Just we're deep in our social media world and we know the answer and, everyone else just like isn't on board. And he's like, you guys, we sell pants on the internet. It's going to be okay. And I just still think that sometimes.
That is such a great quote for everyone, no matter what the product.
Yes, just insert product here. Like, guys, we're selling pants. People are going to keep wearing pants. It's going to be okay.
What an incredible human being that you were able to interact with.
Yes. I learned a ton from my time there. Really special guy. But yeah, I think that has to come into play too. You're not going to win all of those battles. Sometimes it's just, it's like any relationship. There's a give and take. And sometimes you have to just like let things play out. Even if you know that we're like heading towards a brick wall. And then you have to be there not to say, I told you so. You can say it in your head. But then have plan B ready to go. Like, I anticipated this. Here's what we can do instead. So
much wisdom that you've shared with us around a single word, which is objective. Thank you. I knew that we could have talked about this for as long as we have today. So I want to wrap up with something that we ask every guest. We launched at the beginning of 2025 a Better At series to help marketers sharpen their everyday skills that really make a big difference. What's one thing that you've learned to be better at that's made a measurable difference in how you lead, work, and show up in your role?
So I have to pull in what we were just talking about maintaining that perspective. I think if I could boil it down to a word, it would probably be that. Knowing when to die on that hill and knowing when to let things go, understanding what your contributions really do within the bigger picture of the company, no matter how junior or senior or whatever you might be, what is that role that you play? And making sure that you're doing it with that perspective, I think is absolutely critical.
So much wisdom there. Thank you, Diana, very much. What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm one of two Diana Klochkovas. It'll be pretty obvious right away where I am. And yeah, that's probably the best way. I have new things coming soon, kind of placeholder on ZayaDigital.com as Zaya evolves a bit this year. But definitely check me out there as well.
I can't wait to look at that myself. And there are a ton of Lori Jones on LinkedIn. Find me, Lori Sartorius Jones, and I'd love to hear from you. Diana, thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thank you. So much fun.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.